Gestational surrogacy is the first new feasible reproductive technique for men since the beginning of sexual connections between men and women, and now I want to talk about it. Gestational surrogacy is something that I'd like to talk about. Never before have males been able to manage their own reproductive destinies on their own terms. It has traditionally been necessary for a woman to give her consent for a man to start a family, but today, for the first time in history, men have the ability to choose who the mother of their children will be, the gender of their offspring, and even who will carry their children through pregnancy. The price of a surrogate in a foreign country outside of the United States, Canada, or Europe is approximately $40,000, and this is the price for a procedure that is being done currently in Mexico and Thailand. This is the only thing that stops the majority of men from pursuing this reproductive strategy, and it is the only thing that stops them from doing so. When I talk about surrogacy, I'm referring to gestational surrogacy, which is when a fertilized egg is implanted into a third party, and that third party carries the baby to term. The donor egg is typically purchased from a third party for approximately $5,000, and while it can be done in other countries as well, the United States is the most common location for surrogacy procedures. However, the cost is far higher in the United States. In many other countries, such as Canada and certain regions of Europe, the treatment can be performed for at least $100,000. It is against the law to employ a surrogate unless the woman agrees to carry the kid at no cost and receives no payment for her services. How many women do you know who would choose to go through childbirth carrying someone else's baby without some kind of payment? That's the same as saying that prostitution is legal as long as the prostitute doesn't make any money doing it. How many women choose to go through childbirth carrying someone else's baby? When it comes to the artificial womb, I believe that it is still decades away from being completely developed, and women are going to fight it tooth and nail if and when it eventually arrives. Western governments have effectively rendered surrogacy illegal by adopting the legislation in the way that they have. Surrogacy, on the other hand, is your only choice if you want to have your own children in this day and age without running the risk of losing custody of them to your wife or partner in the event of a divorce or a particularly severe custody battle. The primary reason why individuals can now choose to have gestational surrogacy performed is because these ladies would normally pay money so that their fertilized eggs could be transplanted into a third party and then brought to a full pregnancy. This would allow infertile mothers to have children of their own even if their uterus isn't operating properly. It is hoped that by doing so, women will be able to have families later in life, avoid the risks and difficulties associated with childbirth, and substantially lessen the likelihood that their offspring will be born with birth abnormalities. Surrogacy was never intended to be a remedy for male reproductive issues, and I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say that the vast majority of individuals do not want to give birth to babies that have Down syndrome anyway. However, gay men started using this method as their primary reproductive techniques so that they could start children using it. Ricky Martin and Elton John are two examples of male public people that have utilized hike in the past. However, it has only been within the past 5 to 8 years that single straight males have began considering surrogacy as a realistic means to create their own families. Surrogacy has become increasingly popular in recent years. However, as its popularity has grown, so has the opposition against it. In early 2013, India passed a law that banned surrogacy for unmarried heterosexual males who are LGBT. There are also other limits that have been imposed by India on males in unmarried relationships, and these restrictions are based on the so-called moral and ethical reasons. But I believe that the true explanation has to do with the outsourcing of the womb and what that means for the old male-female hierarchy in India. We've been fed the myth of the patriarchy for a long enough time, and men have really been slaves to women in a culture dominated by matriarchy. The role that women play as gatekeepers to reproduction and the sexual enjoyment of males is one way in which they demonstrate their control. The people of India have no difficulty outsourcing engineering jobs, call center work, and factory labor from Western nations, and, in the process, gutting our economies. This is where the actual power lies in our species, and women are aware of it, even if only on a subconscious level. However, the practice of outsourcing delivery has plainly angered them. This is especially true for the women of India, as they are the ones who are truly in charge of that country. Anyways, every time I tell a lady that I'm considering utilizing a surrogate, I always get the same stale line in response: "Don't worry, I'm sure there's a woman out there for you. Just be patient." However, the truth is that my patience has run out. At this point in my life, I am 35 years old, and although I have no interest in getting married, I do want to raise my own children. I have no one to adopt children or to cuckold someone else's children, and the cost of adoption would be the same as the cost of producing a child through surrogacy. And the majority of Western governments won't give children to single fathers unless there is a large supply of children who aren't wanted by their families. Because most single women choose to keep their children, they believe that they can obtain financial support from their former husbands in the state. However, this is not going to happen. If a guy decides to produce a kid on his own without the help of a woman, it can signal the end of a relationship as it has in many instances in the past, and I believe this causes women to feel threatened by the concept of surrogacy. Ironically, affluent alpha males who make up only 10% of the male population but are admired by 60 to 70% of women may opt to parent their children on their own when it comes to raising their offspring. If these men have the financial means to pay for a nanny as well as the fees associated with surrogacy, then they are still able to have children despite the irony and risks associated with traditional marriage. The majority of these wealthy men are aware of the hypergami going on around them, and as a result, they may decide to look into other options for reproduction in order to satisfy their sexual urges. Regarding my point of view, a significant number of individuals lack an awareness of the requirements that must be met when selecting a surrogate mother and a donor egg. What I've done so far is fine. The hospitals in Mexico that are the best fit, and I know where to find websites with donor eggs are practically educated me. Knowledge is basically power, and I aim to educate myself on surrogacy in the near future. When I've asked perhaps half a dozen different ladies I know their thoughts on the topic of using a surrogate mother to carry their child, I've often received two distinct responses each time. I bring up the matter regardless, and the alternative response I get from women is a look of dread and fear on their faces. As soon as I make them aware that there is another viable alternative for reproduction that men can use, they all try to persuade me to steer clear of it and look for women instead. Women have such an unbelievable sense of solidarity when there is a potential upheaval in their pecking order. Being asexual and attempting to bring up a child in this world presents a number of challenges that I will need to address before I can move forward with the surrogacy process. The majority of these challenges revolve on the acceptance or lack of acceptance that I receive from the community. There are a lot of repercussions that come along with being a single father, which is something that the majority of people, including myself, have never seen around them. I still have some things to think about before I make a decision, but I believe the best course of action would be to make the choice by myself first, and then after that would I introduce the child to the rest of the family. They had the opportunity to dissuade me from making that choice, but they chose not to take advantage of it. Once the child is born, everyone around us will be required to embrace him or leave my life. People have also commented on my YouTube channel, suggesting that I look into becoming a parent with a partner, rather than using a surrogate mother. Co-parenting is when a man and a woman live two separate lives but decide to have a child together and divide the costs of raising the child between each other. This choice's proponents need to get their heads tested. There is no sexual activity and no romantic relationships involved. Instead, a child is conceived by artificial insemination, and then the responsibility of the kid's upbringing is shared between two adults for the next 20 or 30 years. However, the legal system is obviously on the side of the woman in this scenario. The woman has the ability to file at any moment for enhanced for sole custody of the child, and if she is successful, the guy will be required to pay child support. Before a potential custody fight that could result in the removal of their children, fathers do not even have the right to engage in sexual activity. I believe that selecting the donor egg and ensuring that the donor already has a child of her own who is in good health should be the first and most crucial step for me to do in this process. And the best thing is that I get to choose whether or not my child will have blue hair and blue eyes. I also get to choose all of the physical traits and attributes of a mate by looking them up in a book, and then selecting the egg that they will look like. I would like to purchase a consumer good. Imagine a future in which large numbers of people, using this method, will be able to mate with famous people. This would be an intriguing new spin on the concept of celebrity intermarriage. Imagine a society where famous women sell their eggs on the open market for millions of dollars each and produce more than 1,000 offspring in a society where alpha females sell their eggs. Imagine the implications of such a reproductive approach on the world's wealthiest and most influential people if now every man could have a child with Scarlett Johansson or Mila Kunis. If something like this becomes popular, men may start selling their celebrity sperm. A lady like her has the potential to become the female equivalent of Genghis Khan, and her DNA may end up in millions of individuals over the course of a few hundred years. Even if an artificial womb were developed, however, this scenario is extremely improbable to play out at this time. Then, in principle, women would get their alpha lays through artificial insemination, and men would pay for it through handouts from the government. A dystopian future, despite the fact that it is not a very pleasant one to anticipate. Nevertheless, enough of my ranting. I hope the remainder of your day goes well.